Hi, this is Arvelyn Hill, and this is Plants of Liberation, an interview series where we highlight folks who are doing incredible work in the plant world around the city. And today we're interviewing Sheryll Durrant in the conservatory. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Our first question is just share your name, your pronouns, and how would you describe your work?
My name is Sheryll Durrant. I'm she, her. And I describe myself as an educator and an urban farmer and someone who is dedicated to food justice and sovereignty.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us for Plants of Liberation today. Could you tell me a little bit about an early memory that you have with plants, maybe from your childhood?
Always goes back to my father. My father was a farmer, and he was an extension officer in Jamaica. And I remember him in our yard, in our earliest home, always taking care of plants or growing something. And some of the things that I have fond memories of are him growing watermelon, corn. We had a big yard. We had coconut trees, we had lemon trees, we had mango trees. It was a yard that was prolific. We had papaya. So there were a lot of things that was growing in that yard. And what I remember is that whenever we would cook anything or my mom would cook anything, she would just send us to get something from the yard. You know, whether it was a breadfruit or ackee or avocado, it was just so prolific. So that's when those are my earliest memories. However, that did not endear me to farming. At that time, it just seemed like very hard work, but the benefits of growing food were tremendous. My memories of many of my family members who were farmers was not this profession that you would go into that would, bring you any financial wealth or independence. It was just not something that attracted me except for harvesting and eating the food. And I was young then, so, that was my earliest memory. My mom was good with flowers. She had roses and herbs. I remember her roses in particular. She was very good at that. And we would have these cherry trees in the yard. And those are some of the things that I remember about her. Anything to do with beautiful flowers, anything to do with fruits, that was her. Yeah, and recently I went back to Jamaica and, visited our old house. And the garden, even though we're not living there anymore and she is in care, the garden was just still so beautiful. There was like Cuban oregano, there was pigeon peas, there was star fruit, bananas. So yeah, those are my earliest memories of plants.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you grew up in Jamaica. When did you come to the U.S.?
I've been traveling to the U.S. since I was 8, because I have family that lives here and we would visit. But to live here, I came to go to college. I transferred from college home in Jamaica to college here. I went to CUNY and I never went home.
Wow.
The plan was to get my degree and go back home. And for some reason, I just ended up living here.
Yeah. You just stayed.
I just stayed.
You just stayed.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. And the work that you do now with plants, I feel like is so expansive, from the urban gardens that you've helped bring to fruition from Kelly Street to New Roots to also Just Foods. So I know about those things, but for people who are watching who don't know about these different gardens, these different organizations, could you talk a little bit about how they started, what they are, and I feel like they're all also connected too, so maybe how they're connected?
Yeah, I feel they're all connected. I feel that urban agriculture, community gardening in New York City is all connected, and it's a kind of a different animal from anywhere else that I've visited in the US, because each garden it's not a monolith. Every garden is dedicated to something. It could be growing food, it could be growing flowers, it could be cultural, and that's the beauty of community gardening and urban agriculture in New York, which I love. Is that you can step into a garden space and it is its own space. You know, it reflects the neighborhood, it reflects the people who are in the neighborhood. So yeah, it's really very different. And I came to community gardening. I think community gardening came to me. I didn't come to it. I was in marketing for 20 odd years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I don't know how old you are, but in 2008, the economy crashed.
Yes, I remember that.
I keep telling this story all the time. And it was an opportunity for what do I want to do when I grow up. And in the community that I lived in Brooklyn at the time, I got connected to a group of folks who were doing sustainability work. They were doing composting, they were doing energy efficiency, and they were helping to develop community gardens. And I just started to volunteer. And I think that was how I came back full circle to being connected to plants by volunteering in these different gardens. And then I got hooked up to an organization called Sustainable Flatbush, worked with them for a number of years, and I honed my skills there. And I volunteered in many other gardens, many other urban farms. I went to farm school, NYC, and I think that's how my second career began. And I haven't looked back. And this is the real career. This is really what I wanted to do when I grew up. What I used community gardening to do was to educate. I thought that was the biggest strength from the work that I did. And what we developed was our own herbal garden. And from herbalism, we taught folks how to use culinary and medicinal herbs for their health and well-being. It was really interesting because I suffer from asthma, and there is an apothecary in my neighborhood at the time called Sacred Vibes. And I just stopped in there one day and I said, you know, we have a community garden and you do herbs. How about we come together and develop something? And I think that was how I started to get involved in programming and making programming the tenet of the work that we do in community gardening. So we developed these series of workshops, and they were themed, whether it was herbalism for children, herbalism for the elderly, and we would connect it to our community because a lot of people within the community, they had children. So it was a natural, bridge to create a community garden, to create programming that would speak to children. But one of the things that really touched me was the immigrant population that took care of their elderly parents. So one of the most successful workshops we had was herbs for the elderly. And the reason why I loved this was because the community got involved. They began to remember the herbs that they would use in their own country for themselves and for their parents. And we developed this whole series of workshops around herbalism for the elderly. And then people would start to talk about other things that affected them, like fatigue and sleep and well-being. And it's through connecting with community that you begin to develop these programs, and you begin to develop a community garden that spoke to the community, and it wasn't just yours. It belonged to the community. And from there, my involvement in community garden grew. I continued to volunteer in other spaces. I interned through farm school at the youth farm. I don't think the youth farm is there anymore. Hattie Carthon was one of the farms I experienced. East New York Farms was another farm that I experienced, many others. But it's out of that I got my first job, my first real job that actually paid me. I got connected to the International Rescue Committee, and they had a program called New Roots. And the New Roots program is not only in New York City, it's a national program, and it was developed in response to arriving refugee societies who had deep connection to agriculture and wanted a way to keep that connection to agriculture, to grow food for their own food security, but also a way to keep connected to the land. And that was how the New Roots program was born. So I got connected to the New Roots Community Farm because that was the first site in New York that was developed through the New Roots program. It's a half-acre farm in the South Bronx. It's off the Grand Concourse, and it's just a wonderful program where you not only work with refugees, asylees, but you work with community, arriving immigrants, community members, and we developed a site and a program where we would grow food for our community and by extension for anybody who volunteered at the farm and for anybody who was food insecure. So we're going into our 11th year at New Roots, and what has happened as a result of building out this program is that our work is now steeped in food security and food sovereignty, and even more so in education. And we grow a lot of culturally relevant crops because of who our community are. We'll grow bissap, what we call Jamaican sorrel. We'll grow pigeon peas, what we call in Jamaica gungo peas, and what our Latinx community called gandules. We grow malahia, we grow turmeric, ginger, many different types of crops that speak to our community. We have cooking demos to demonstrate or to remind people, or they teach us how to use those crops. We have workshops around pollinators, workshops around honey harvesting and bees, crop planning, so that people within our community can get steeped in what does it mean to steward a green space, especially in an urban environment. And out of that program, we got funding from the USDA to develop an immigrant urban ag and garden training program, which we ran for 3 years until the funding ended this year. And we have applied for more funding in order to be able to continue this program. And what this program was our own kind of like farm school, where our immigrant population, especially if they were refugees, asylees, we also did it in 2 languages, English and Spanish simultaneously, were able to do that deep dive into agriculture. Yes, they know soil, they know how to grow things, but in America, everything is about credentials. So to have a more formalized structure so that they will be able to get a certificate and do an internship, so that they can say that through the New Roots program, they were able to do this immigrant urban ag training program, and we have a certificate to prove it. And I would say the program is very successful because a number of our graduates are working in green spaces.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I think that with that success, we have a responsibility to continue to get funding to continue this program. I think we need a lot of these types of programs within New York City.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just one. Farm school is one of them. Ours is another. Many other types of programs. We have the space for it. Yeah. Is that enough for you?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. That's just New Roots. You haven't spoken about Kelly Street.
So, wow. Jeez, I forgot about Kelly Street.
Yes.
Kelly Street grew out of New Roots. It's through New Roots that I heard about Kelly Street Garden. It's on Kelly Street in the South Bronx, and it's behind 4 affordable housing developments. And during what everyone knows now, they refer to as, before it was the Bronx is burning, now it's referred to as the decade of fire, because it was a period of disinvestment in the Bronx, simply because Black and brown people lived in the Bronx. And people used to grow food in that backyard, you know. So when the buildings were slated for renovation, one of the asks of community members was to have their garden back. And through redevelopment and funding, the garden was built, and it's largely stewarded by people who live in the Bronx, some community members, some outside the community, but it attracts a wide swath of folks who just are attracted to this community garden and the programming that we do. And my forte is education and building programming with my community. And we just replicated that in the Bronx a little differently from a New Roots, because we are mostly dealing with community members on our block and in the radius of our community. We do the same type of food security work. But one of the things that we have at Kelly Street, which is different from New Roots, is we built a community apothecary. So I extended, brought that extension from Brooklyn, and work with community to build our own community apothecary, because that's what community asks for as well. How to use medicinal and culinary herbs to treat or to address the health disparities that were in the neighborhood. We're not curing anybody. We are using food as medicine, as part of your health and well-being. And the apothecary is free. anybody can come down to the apothecary and get tinctures or dried herbs for tea. They can come to any of the workshops. We still work with Sacred Vibes Apothecary because now they're apprentices. Part of their internship is to give back to community. So Kelly Street is one of those places where they come and they help with the garden and they teach folks about herbs, and they show us how to make our own tinctures and our own herbs. And I think that is one of the strengths of Kelly Street Garden, and the fact that it is embedded in community within these buildings that our community members live in. And it's my second. No, I don't even know which is my second love. They are my love.
Yeah, yeah.
And as a result of the success of the urban farm, we during COVID we started another garden in Woodside, Queens, New Roots Community Garden, and the community, that is a beautiful space where community members it was just the right time. During COVID, people were isolated to be able to build out and with community, a community garden whereby also embedded in community with community members that live nearby, and just replicate another program that spoke to that community. Different demographic, mostly South Asian, different types of culturally relevant crops, but it is for community. Community has a vested interest in developing it in a way that speaks to them.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I have had the pleasure of visiting Kelly Street and New Roots, and they're total oases. That like once you're there, you really feel like you're in a whole other world. And the accessibility component of them is so powerful through the programming and the people who tend to the spaces. Like you really can feel the love and dedication that has gone into there.
Yeah, I agree. And community has just taken it over. And that's the part that speaks to the success, that community is involved and community is dedicated to being involved in the space. And they show up, they show up. And I like the whole idea that we are gardening and we are farming for our food security. We are gardening for our health and well-being. Because health and well-being is not only about food. Health and well-being is also about mental health and well-being. To be in a green space that is, I'm sitting here, just to be surrounded by greenery, it just brings everything down.
Yeah.
It's very calming, it's very soothing. To be able to put your hand in soil, it's very calming, it's very soothing. It does something to the psyche, to the physical body, to mental health. And I feel like we need more of these spaces. And the rest of my life is to advocate for these particular types of spaces. It is part of the urban landscape. It should be a part of the urban landscape. And if we're thinking about a future, and if we're thinking about what the future of an urban landscape should look like, it should always involve green spaces. Whether it is developed or whether we're looking at a green space that has already been there and keeping it as a green space. But we can't just build, concrete and steel without thinking about trees and flowers and what it does to the human spirit. The planet was all trees, flowers, animals, dirt, before we started building anything.
I think that also leads nicely into my next question, just for not even young people, but just anybody who might see an empty lot in their neighborhood or want to start a community garden. I think a lot of people, I know they want to get involved, they want to start, but they might not know how. Do you recommend... what do you recommend, in terms of joining a local community garden that's already been established?
I recommend joining a community garden. The reason why is because many of the community spaces in New York City are run by volunteers. And it's a pet peeve of mine. It's work. It should be paid for. Here is a way to involve community, and here is a way to create jobs within a community. To manage green space.
Yeah.
Why isn't that a thing? Why should we continue to rely on I'm not putting down volunteer labor, but when you're a volunteer, it's your time and you should be able to weave in and out of a volunteer space as much or as little as you like. But to sustain a green space, you need dedicated people and it's a job. You know, it's a job, and many of our community gardens lack continuity and lack sustainability because the folks who manage them are the same folks that have been managing them for years, and they have other hustles, they have other jobs.
Yeah.
So if you want to get involved in green space, look for a community garden in your area that needs help and start there. And if you have skills on how to raise funding for your community garden, I encourage you to do so. You know, and if you and to get on the advocacy bandwagon and advocate for spaces to be in communities in perpetuity, sustainable, and a way in which to bring jobs to a community. I mean, at Kelly Street, one of the things we do is we try to raise funding so that we can stipend our community members. So you stipend your community members for a few hours each week, they show up.
Yeah.
They show up because it can sustain them.
Yeah.
That stipend can sustain them for those amount of hours that they can give to the community garden. And I think it's something that we should, our elected officials should look into. Our community should I keep asking for our community to advocate more. We have elected officials. Why aren't you looking into this? Why isn't this a thing?
Yeah.
To make our communities healthier, to develop jobs within a community that you don't have to go miles away to work. A green space is very, very important, so here's an opportunity to do that and to change a paradigm and to change the way we think about what a city can look like,
And I also want to go back to Just Foods too, because you're
I'm the board president of
Just
Food. And Just Food is actually going to be celebrating 30 years.
Wow.
This year, and Just Food's primary goal throughout its years is to help communities to develop their own food models. In developing food models, we have championed CSAs in communities. We are the largest network in New York City, and connecting those CSAs to local farmers, and because there is something to be said for the urban-rural connection, supporting up and down the state those folks who grow our food, whether it's in the city, whether it's a soil garden, whether it's a rooftop garden, whatever type of garden it is, and connecting that with folks who live in our rural areas and also grow our food and send food down to folks in New York City, whether it's through a CSA, through a farmer's market, or just through mutual aid.
Yeah.
So that's the work of Just Food. It's like this circle. It's holistic, connecting all of that together. Yeah.
Amazing. And this whole interview series is called Plants is Liberation. I feel like a lot of what you're talking about already leads to that, but can you speak directly about the ways in which your work with plants, urban gardening, is an act of liberation for you and also your community?
For me personally, just the simple act of walking into the community space, it's like, as you said, you mentioned earlier that it was an oasis. In the middle of the Grand Concourse, there is this half acre where when I walk in, it's as if I'm in a different space. That alone in of itself is liberating. The fact that within this space, with community, we can decide how and what we want to grow. We can decide what the space is going to look for so that it speaks to everybody who has a hand in in sustaining that place. The liberation is about growing not only your own food, but growing food that you yourself eat.
Yeah.
That's an act of liberation. Putting your hand in the soil and seeing how it affects you physically. That's an act of liberation. Anything to do with connecting with space, and actually recognizing that the liberatory part is not what the planet or the soil or the space can do for me. The liberatory part is that I, as a land steward, have this responsibility to take care of this space. That's where the liberation comes in, where we let go of things being extractive, let go of ownership in that sense, and say, this is our planet, this is the space. If we treat it right, it will treat us right too. If we have more green spaces, we can breathe better. If we have clean soil, we can grow more healthy food. It's symbiotic. We take care of each other. That's the liberation part. And the letting go is very, very important for the liberation, you know.
Letting go of what?
Letting go of ownership, letting go of like, this is mine, letting go of, I am doing this for me,
Yeah.
you know. Now, that part, I think that part is hard for us humans because we grow up in a society where it's extractive, we grow up in a society where we tend to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but community is very important, you know. Community is what brings us joy. You know, being in community and knowing that there are people who care about you and you care about people. That's part of the liberation.
I love that. Yes, it's so true.
Yeah.
It speaks to really the interconnectedness of it all.
No man is an island,
Yeah.
you know.
And so if you, Sheryll, were a plant, what plant would you be and why? If you had to choose one.
The same plant I've been choosing all my life, which is the okra plant. It is, to me, one of the most beautiful plants I've ever seen. The flower is gorgeous. And I like the fact that every time you harvest the okra, it grows taller. I just love that about the okra. And besides, I love pickled okra, that too.
I recently discovered okra-infused water in the summertime. It's really nice as well.
Interesting.
And really hydrating too.
I did not know about that.
Yeah, it was like,
that I have to.
You gotta try it.
Because I am a fan of pickled. I will eat anything pickled. If it can be pickled, Sheryll will eat it. And I love pickled okra. But just watching the plant grow and how majestic it is and how beautiful the flowers are, I just love that plant. That is the plant.
And looking forward to this year, is there any programming coming up that you want to share or anything that you want to advocate for these spaces?
I want to advocate for money. I want to advocate for funding for all green spaces so that they can be the best that they can be. But I want to advocate for the community education programs that we have at all our spaces, and keeping fingers crossed that more funding comes in for us to continue our immigrant and urban ag training program. For me, education is the key. You know, if people know where their food comes from, know how to grow their own food, they have more power. They can make better decisions and they can advocate for better food for their community. So anything in particular? One of the things I really want to advocate for is more climate smart, and that's a whole different interview. We're not going to go into that now, but more climate smart infrastructure for community gardens. You know, things that will let us collect more rainwater in our gardens, smart infrastructure that will allow us to grow more food in smaller spaces, or and things like that. You know, so that's something I've been thinking about. How would that work? Where you get funding for that? Where you get education for that?
Yeah.
You know, how to mitigate climate change by using green spaces more effectively to make it cooler, just in the area in which you grow things, you know, the area where you are. So I think about things like, yes, if we had more green spaces, maybe our city would be cooler, you know. If we had more climate smart infrastructure, maybe we'd be a little bit more efficient on how we use the spaces. I don't know where that's going yet, but it's things that I've been mulling around. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
No problem.
And for people who want to learn more about your work or to get in touch with you, where is the best place for them to find you on the internet?
The internet, I'm not very good at that. But I do have an Instagram page, Sheryll Durrant. New Roots has an Instagram page, New Roots Bronx and New Roots Queens, and Kelly Street also has an Instagram page. Yeah, I think that's the best place to find us.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.